Chelsea Luca is a psychologist who lives in northern New South Wales, Australia, proudly recognising this area as Bundjalung country. The human experience has always intrigued Chelsea, leading her down the path of psychology. Today, as the owner of Connect Us Psychology, she dedicates her professional life to supporting autistic and ADHD individuals. Chelsea also brings lived experience to her work. She is autistic and ADHD, and her journey has been both enlightening and challenging, often feeling as though she was navigating a world that didn't always feel like it was tailored for her. Drawing from her lived and clinical experiences, she wrote Square Me, Round World to provide a deep dive into the lives and minds of ADHD and autistic individuals. Chelsea is also a mother to two neurodivergent children, and a significant motivator for her is to work toward a world where they feel valued and safe. Okay. Hello, Chelsea.
Hi.
Thanks so much for being here. I know you deal with families and you deal with children who are what do you call them?
Oh, it depends. There's autistic, ADHD.
Right.
Yeah. So terminology, I think, is quite confusing these days because I think there's a lot of words thrown around. I'm quite pedantic about terminology because I
Yeah.
think language is really important in terms of the way that we, conceptualize things. So essentially, we have, neurodiversity, which I talk about neurodiversity like understanding like biodiversity in human brains. So, neurodiversity just refers to the fact that there is, a range of different neurotypes in our world. Then we have neurodivergent, which means an individual whose brain diverges from, the average or the typical neurotype. And then under the neurodivergent umbrella, that's where, autism, ADHD, OCD, schizophrenia, bipolar, ticks into it. So all, neurodivergence is huge. It covers, such a wide array of different neurotypes.
Yeah.
And it's about understanding that neurodiversity is not only expected, but it's actually advantageous for human survival. Because if we all had the same brains, then we probably wouldn't be here and life would be a lot more boring than
Yes,
it
that's
is.
right. That's right. Yeah. And I find like I have three grandchildren who have autism and ADHD, and their questions are so out of the box that I think I've never thought in that way. And it gets people thinking like
Hmm,
but as long as they're patient enough,
hmm, yeah.
because their brain is firing, firing, firing. And it's like, just be patient. People get sick of answering questions to them as well.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah, and I think, the more we can understand about the diversity of, being in and experiencing the world around us, the more, we will get to see the beauty from all of those different perspectives, and be able to share those and be able to value those rather than just valuing, the neuronormative way of doing things.
yeah. So how did you get into specializing in this?
So I'm an autistic ADHD myself, and I have two autistic ADHD children, and I think I kind of initially just fell into it, and then kind of picked up, and it became one of my interest areas, which meant that I learned all of the things and read all of the things and do all of the things. And then it wasn't very long before I found myself with an entire caseload of autistic ADHD, pretty much because neurotypes tend to flock together.
Yep.
And so yeah, so it's kind of just snowballed, I guess. But it's been a pretty, a journey which felt right, I guess, all along the way. And it's just been a lot for me, a lot about, I think, sitting in the neurodiversity affirming space, there's a lot of unlearning, there's a lot of relearning, there's a lot of being really humble and being really, I guess approaching psychology very differently as well. very much apart from the, expert model. It's very much the collaborative model in terms of, I know this stuff and you know this stuff, can we kind of put our stuff that we know together and kind of make sense of this thing?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, how do people, because you test for autism and ADHD as well, don't you? So who comes to you asking that, or do they ask that? What happens? What's the process?
Yeah, so it can be really varied. I think, there's been a lot more information more readily available to people these days, particularly through social media and things like that, which has been so great in terms of building awareness outside of that really stereotyped way of understanding, these neurotypes. So I think, we're in this space where, parents are potentially, looking at their kiddos and going, oh, okay, hang on, we're noticing some things here that might fit in with this, that we've seen some, we've heard some information about this, or, adults who are, maybe accessing social media and going, hang on, I'm relating to all of this. Am I supposed to be relating to all of this? And so, there's a whole variety of people who are starting to recognize, oh, actually, I think I really identify with these neurotypes. And then, we really, at the way things are at the moment systemically, there's a lot of value placed on self-identification in terms of, accessing formal identification. There's so many barriers to do that, for many people. And so, self-identification is really readily accepted. But of course, a lot of people, particularly, in this space as well, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, and there's a lot of like, we want to have, an official, recognition of our identity, and we want to go through the process of unpacking that a little bit more. So, for kiddos, it might be about really identifying, what's going on for them, how their brain kind of works, what might support them in different environments, and adults, of course, the same thing, but also really that journey of self-understanding and of getting to, kind of reflect and reframe on some of the things they've been through with a different lens.
Yeah. So, is there a different way of working with someone who's autistic in therapy? Like, is it better to have a therapist who's autistic that understands autism?
So, and we're in a really interesting space in relation to this, in that they've just released competencies related to neurodiversity affirming practice. So the Psychology Board of Australia has just released competencies stating that from November next year, it will be a requirement that all psychologists are trained in neurodiversity affirming practice and can ensure that they are practicing in a neurodiversity affirming way. Now, one of the reasons that is so key is that so many autistic and ADHDers, and of course other forms of neurodiversity, have been, really not served well, by different forms of, therapy and, all sorts of things that have happened. And one example that I use is having people who come to seek help, and we may be helping them through, the CBT model or cognitive behavioral therapy, and they might say, oh, I've got really bad social anxiety, and we might try and reframe that and say like, oh no, that's just the way that you're thinking about it. Let's change the way you're thinking about it, and it's going to be so much easier. Now, for an autistic person, it is quite likely that being in a social situation is really unsafe for them and has been really unsafe for them multiple times. Similarly to if they say, oh, this is too loud, it's too overwhelming for me to be here. No, no, you're fine. Just you'll be fine. Let's go, keep busy and we'll be okay. So a lot of therapy was really invalidating autistic people's experiences. And, when you think about ADHDers, a lot of the things they've been told throughout their life is try harder, you just got to try harder, just stop being so lazy, you just got to keep on top of these things, just keep a diary, write it down, put an alarm in your phone. I have alarms in my phone to remind me to eat, and I still don't eat,
Mm,
and I'm a well-educated adult. So, I think that there's so much that's kind of been really framed under these neuronormative expectations that has subsequently done harm, I'm hoping not intentionally,
mm,
but without that understanding, support didn't feel supportive. And
mm,
so, it's not that I think uh, that only autistic therapists or only ADHD therapists can be effective with those populations, but it's that they need to have the understanding, and they need to have that understanding from lived experience. So they need to have learnt from lived experience
yeah.
and really have done that work in terms of unlearning and relearning in terms of neurodiversity affirming practice and what that looks like.
Yeah. Did I read that you were late diagnosed as well?
Yeah, yep. So I was late identified. I think I was in my mid-30s, I think. And yes, so it's only been a couple of years for myself, and it only came about because I recognized that my daughter was autistic, and my daughter is my carbon copy. So, it wasn't a very far job to go, that if this is going on for her, then hey, okay, that's probably likely that that's, fits for me as well. And that's certainly the case, for a whole lot of people, in that, these neurotypes are genetic, and, we didn't have really great information previously. And so, there's a lot of parents who I see in assessments, or even just in therapy, who will say, oh, but that was just what I was like as a child. And I'll say, yep, I'm sure that was just what you were like as a child. That doesn't tell me anything except for that, potentially this is what is also going on for you as well. So, when things are genetic, it's like, this is the norm. Yes, it is the norm for your family,
Mm.
because, your family are potentially all neurodivergent.
Wow, that's interesting. So
Yeah.
it is like generational. So every time, if you have a child who's autistic or ADHD, is it
So they're both genetic. I wouldn't say it's
right?
ever as simple as, if you have a child that is autistic or ADHD, both parents are autistic ADHD,
Yeah.
but, you would typically see at least one of the parents is autistic ADHD.
Oh,
So it's got a very strong genetic link.
right.
And, again, this is what we're building more understanding of, as we start to understand the neurotypes better and start to see it less from, so, before, our framing was very much medical model, in terms of, these things are disorders, and, these people have deficits in these things, and when we understood things in that way, our focus was on, let's find a cure, let's find this way to teach these people how to be normal, whereas now, through the neurodiversity affirming movement, it's like, no, actually, let's understand these things as neurotypes and as normal divergences, and let's find a way to understand them and support them instead of, saying, oh, you are, inferior to this way of being.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And I hate the word normal anyway in any context, because there is no normal. There are individuals within the world. So
Yeah,
who feel
yeah,
different, and their brain is different as well.
yeah.
So yeah. And it's so interesting because the elder of the grandchildren, the granddaughter, she was 12 when she was, you don't say diagnosed, what do you say?
So, I mean, diagnosed is what's still used, in that there is still so much of our system governed by the medical model,
Yeah.
so if people are trying to get support, all of our support systems are governed by the medical model. So, for a lot of people, it's necessary to view it as diagnosis, and it's necessary to use medical model language just to get the support that they need, In regards to framing it, I guess in a more neurodiversity affirming way, we would say identification, in that we're identifying your neurotype.
Yeah,
We're not diagnosing you with a disorder, we're identifying your neurotype
yeah,
and
yeah.
learning about your brain.
Yeah, yeah, and that was the most interesting thing, that we learned so much about her brain, like, and how differently she thinks, and the things that come into her brain is so different to what I would imagine.
Mm,
So, and once I start, what actually got me to think differently was Fern Bailey's book.
mm,
That explained it so brilliantly.
yeah,
And I thought, oh, I need to, put more energy into learning more about this.
yeah.
And yeah, and just when you just settle into, okay, their brains are different, they think differently, they see differently, and need to, accommodate that. But it's also us, trying to fit them into a box as well. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
difficult to teach other people. This
yeah.
is not what they are. They don't fit into this box. They're not all all the same, for one thing.
So
And
there is actually more heterogeneity in the autistic population than the non-autistic population. So, I think it's really important to be aware that, there is so much, as you said, so much variation in the autistic population, so much variation in the ADHD population. And so, while understanding your identity and understanding how your brain works, is so important, and can come with accessing shared experience, and can come with accessing language, and can come with accessing, really baseline information. The key thing is understanding that person's individual brain and what their individual support needs are and how they can be met, rather than focusing on, oh, you fit this, word, we're going to treat you in this way, when it's a lot of those things aren't going to be helpful for that person at all. And, a lot of the time, a lot of the support needs are there because the world is not set up in a way that works for autistic or ADHD brains, So if the world, was a little bit better catered to people that have autistic and ADHD brains, there'd probably be a reduction in support needs, But with the way it is at the moment, a lot of people have, quite significant support needs in different environments just because they're not being catered to.
yeah. So learning more about how your own brain, as an autistic person, how your own brain works, and how you fit into the world, really helps you maneuver in the world.
It helps you exist. So, one of the things that I focus on quite a lot with my clients is what I call energy management, or capacity management. So, just looking at, how much capacity you typically have, how much capacity different things take you, and, being able to identify that and then communicate that, in that, it might be that you have, say, um, you know, 4 lots of capacity for your day, and it might be that getting ready in the morning takes 2
Mm.
for you. And so, being able to communicate that, and being able to even just understand that for yourself, that, gosh, just walking out the door in the morning wipes me of half of my capacity, or gosh, being in this busy shopping center wipes 3/4 of my capacity in 10 minutes, you
Mm.
know. And so, that part can be really helpful just in a practical kind of day-to-day existing in the world sense. But then in terms of building self-compassion, so, a lot of my therapy, I use compassion-focused therapy. And, we can't build self-compassion if we don't have understanding. If we don't have the right facts, we can't build self-compassion. So we can't say, like, it's okay that you forgot your keys for the 7th day in the row, because of course, how are you going to remember them? Without that information, we just go like, gosh, why do you keep forgetting your keys? Like, come on, you think you'd remember them by now,
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas if we have that understanding, we have that information, we can build that self-compassion because we're working with the right information. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, 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 certainly. I'm just thinking of kids, like they had all the lockdowns, so they were at home by themselves doing whatever.
Mhm.
And now they're getting back on, getting back into school in a classroom
Mm.
situation.
Mm.
It's a lot.
Mhm.
How do you work with that? And do they end up back in the classroom, for one thing?
It depends.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think that the school system in general is built for children in general.
No, neither
And,
do I.
I think that when you add, being autistic or ADHD on top of that, it's a lot. And it's, essentially for a lot of kiddos, putting them in an environment where they don't feel safe five
Mm.
days a week, 6
Mm.
hours a day. And I know if I was in that situation, I would not function very well. So, I think a lot of the work in that area really should be around focusing on how do we make these environments safe, you
Yeah.
know, for each individual, what is it that you need for you to feel safe in that environment?
Yeah.
And if that can't happen due to systemic things or, then what are our alternatives?
Mm.
And, sometimes we don't have a lot. Sometimes we don't have a
Mm.
lot of alternatives. We're in a space where, quite often both parents have to work or, there might only be one caregiver and, there's not much flexibility. So,
Mm.
we try and do the best we can, but we also recognize and we also validate for the kiddo, like, of course, this is hard. Like, of course, you're not okay because
Mm.
we are sending you into a situation where you are unsafe. And we've done the best we can to make it as safe as we can, but there's only so much we can do.
Yeah, that's right. So then, do you work with families together, like to understand and to know that one parent or both parents are actually, autistic or ADHD or neurodivergent in some way?
Yeah, so I think, look, I work across the lifespan. So I work with a whole range of different people. And definitely I try and work from a holistic perspective in that, if we can get family, if we can get, someone from school involved, if we can get, as much as we can, kind of a big picture situation and kind of all be working together towards the same goal. Definitely, that's going to be a lot more effective than working one-on-one with a kiddo that can't change much about their own situation.
Mm.
I think we forget often how little choice and control children have, and we wonder why their behaviors are so big.
Yeah.
Because they're so dysregulated, because they have such little choice and control, and they're put in, all of these situations that are so overwhelming for them and so uncomfortable for them.
Yeah.
So definitely, working with parents or working with families or working with school to try and say, how can we try and make this work as workable as possible?
Yeah. So do you have schools understand, like, are they understanding of you going in or they're asking them to come and talk and
It
have?
really depends. There are some schools that are really receptive. So, for example, I just recently ran a webinar for educators and had, a really good turnout of educators attending. There's certainly, I would say predominantly educators want to do the best for their kiddos. It's just, there's so much for them to learn. And then they're also in a system which isn't supporting them either.
Yeah.
And so, I think that the majority want to learn, how can we better support these kiddos that are in our class? They're not a small number of kiddos. So
Mm.
how can we learn to support them better? And, I think that if that information can be made easily accessible for them, I think a lot of educators are, keen to jump on board. I think there definitely are some barriers in terms of, oh, that's the way we've always done things. And, I can't change things for one student and, they just have to learn to deal with it. What about when they're in the real world? There's a lot of barriers that I hear. I have some pretty good arguments to all of those barriers.
Mhm.
So, I find that when you approach it in that I'm trying to support you to support your student, like I'm trying to make things easier for you, most people are pretty keen to jump on board, if that's going to mean that things are going to be made easier for them and, in the best interests of their students.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So how do parents react to their child being identified as neurodivergent?
Look, I think there's a whole range of different emotions experienced, and I would say similarly for adults, being identified, there's a whole range of different emotions in terms of, the different, I guess, perspectives or different things that might be focusing on. It also depends on the information that the person has been given. So, I often see people who, maybe were diagnosed by their pediatrician, and the pediatrician kind of didn't give them any information, and it was very doom and gloom medical model situation. And so parents are obviously responding with grief in that situation, in terms of, I thought, oh, I had all of these thoughts for my, my child's life and what our life would look like. And, now I've been given this, medical model information, and that's so hard to sit with, you know, whereas I find if parents are provided, neurodiversity affirming information in terms of, this is the difference. Yes, there are challenges, a lot of which are brought about by the fact that we live in a world that's not built to suit your kiddo, but there are also beautiful strengths. And, this isn't a thing that we need to frame as a disorder. This is a thing that we need to understand and support and accommodate, and I find that that definitely leads to a different journey than, the medical model framing, and the medical model framing that says, quick, put your kids in therapy and, have them do 40 hours of therapy a week at 2 years old, and all of these, things that put an extreme amount of demand on a parent, who's probably kind of struggling with things themselves, because potentially they are also autistic or ADHD, and so I find that, it really depends on how they have been supported as to what that journey looks like. I
Mhm.
think as well, there is always that reframing part in terms of, whether it might be later on, and I often see this in adults, or if, the kiddos are a bit older, that grief for things have been so hard and they didn't
Yeah.
have to be this hard.
Yes.
If we'd had this information earlier, things might have been a bit easier.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's certainly the reaction of a lot of adults who, have struggled through a lot in their lifetime and have developed some really, unkind thoughts about themselves that
Mm.
they didn't have to, if they had the right information from the start.
Yeah. 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 You mentioned there that some parents might be told, like, they've got early identification, like 4 or 5 years old. You need all these therapies, 40 hours a week, whatever. You need occupational therapy, speech therapy, whatever therapy. What are your thoughts on that then?
So I think that early identification is great, in that if we can get that information to that person and that family, and, the supports around that person as early as possible, awesome.
Hmm.
Also, the focus should be on changing the environment. So, we do not need to change these kiddos. They have the skills that they need to have. They have autistic social skills, or they have ADHD social skills. They don't need neurotypical social skills.
Yeah.
We can help them in understanding. It's like, so I often talk about it being like a foreign language. If you were traveling to France, we're
Mhm.
going to teach you, we're going to support you, we're going to give you a guidebook to help you navigate the world around you, but we're not going to expect you to become French.
Yes.
So, so we can support kiddos, maybe with their feelings of noticing that they feel a bit different from their peers. We can support them with, okay, you're probably experiencing really intense emotions, and your emotions are probably escalating really quickly because you've got a lot of stuff around you that's overwhelming you.
Mm.
We can help them to understand their own sensory experiences.
Right.
So we can definitely support kiddos in that way. We can support them to develop a positive neurodivergent identity. So we can help them to understand, what does an autistic brain mean? What does an ADHD brain mean? How can you support yourself, knowing that information? We can teach them to be proud of their identity. So, we can do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But primarily from an early age, it's about supporting them environment wise. So supporting their parents, supporting school, making their environment fit them as best as we can.
Yeah. Wow. I have never heard that. It's really great to hear that they
Mm.
don't. don't have to, fit in to the box. So, yeah.
And this is where so much harm has come from, is that so much of the focus has been on, we want to teach you to be neurotypical. We need to teach you to make eye contact. We need to teach you to have reciprocal conversations. We need to teach you to wait and take turns. It's like, well, no, actually, maybe we just need to revisit neuronormative expectations and say, like, hang on, should everyone be complying with this? Maybe not,
Yeah.
because, those things, I mean, I very rarely make eye contact with people and I still communicate just fine,
Yes.
And so it's not that we need to change those things about that person. It's that we need the people in their environment to understand that is a perfectly acceptable way of being. And, this expectation is just based on your way of how you think things should be, rather than having any foundational basis to it at all.
Yeah. So, if, like with ADHD, the first thing they do is put the kids on medication. Thoughts on that?
So ADHD is quite, I mean, I would say there's other, other things that this is first line, but medication is actually first line recommendation when it comes to ADHD. Now, if we lived in a very different world that maybe didn't have, the expectations that our world does, maybe it wouldn't be as necessary. But I guess at the moment we live in a world that places expectations on ADHDers that are very difficult for them to meet in a lot of situations unmedicated. With regards to medication, and I'm not a psychiatrist, I don't prescribe medication, so I always, just give the disclaimer that, this is coming from a just knowledge perspective rather than a, medicating perspective. I always say, look, I don't think there's a right or a wrong choice for any individual, any family, but I'm most passionate about people being informed and making informed choices. So having access to correct information in terms of what medication is, what it's supposed to do, what its function is within the brain. I also think, the more we can involve a kiddo as early as possible, in terms of their medication journey and their body, the better, in terms of we can work with them in that. Is this something that makes things easier for you? Is this something that makes you feel good in your body? Or does this make you feel yucky in your body? Does this make things easier for you? And does this make it easier for you to do the things you want and have to do? Does this mean you have more capacity at the end of the day? So, I think it's important that we view it as a tool and as something that, can be really helpful for a lot of people. But I think it's about really having that information and feeling really empowered to make that informed choice, which I think often then helps people to sit better with the idea of, I'm medicating my child for these reasons. And, I feel really comfortable with that decision. I'm also involving my child in the decision and getting feedback from them in terms of, has this made things easier for you?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And also, while you were talking there, I have read a lot of stuff recently about nutrition being a big part of making neurodivergent people.
So I would say that that's very unfounded. I get very frustrated with a lot of the things in media, because a lot of the things are not founded on correct information, and a lot of research. I mean, we still have research. There was a study coming out, I think last week or the week before, in terms of increased levels of BPA causing autism. Now, there is a lot of research being done that is looking at, things that occur together, that happen, and assuming, causation from things without looking at so many nuances that are involved in the situation. And one of the things that I looked into, when I first started to really recognize that research was missing the ball in so many areas, is looking at the whether there was an increased rate of hyperemesis gravidarum, which is increased nausea and vomiting in pregnancy in autistic women. Because I just had a thought that there might be an increased rate. Now I looked to the research, and the research stated that if you had hyperemesis gravidarum, you were at higher risk of having an autistic child. Now I said, because the mums were probably autistic, which put them at higher risk of having autistic children, but nothing in the research referred to, anything about the women being autistic. So, everything from that made this, the conclusion that, having this thing in pregnancy put you at greater risk of having an autistic child. So I think, there's so much nuance that's missed in research. And, there's now a lot of focus on research being co-produced. So having autistic people involved in research about autistic people.
Oh,
Right.
fancy that. Yeah.
To actually make sure we're researching the things that need to be researched, and, and really being really ethical and mindful about research, and, and mindful as well as to what conclusions other people who maybe aren't as informed about research might draw from that research. So, when we're looking at things like nutrition, we need to keep in mind that autistic people have, can be hugely sensory sensitive when it comes to food. So, there's going to be so many confounds from what autistic people are able to eat, in terms of what that might look like, in terms of, oh, their diet has caused this. No, they were autistic, which meant that their diet looked like this, which meant that when you took this, you put 1 and 3 together without acknowledging that 2 existed in the middle.
Yeah. Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, gee. Yeah, because this puts a whole load of questions into like previous stuff that has been said about autism. Like, autism was caused by vaccines. And it was it's a new thing, and everybody wants to be autistic now, or OCD or ADHD, and how come it's all of a sudden now that everybody's, being diagnosed with these things? So,
And I think, one of the things that I often point to when people are bringing those things up is that, previously left-handedness was not allowed to exist, and then suddenly when it was allowed to exist, there was an explosion of the rate of left-handedness. Now, people didn't just magically become left-handed, they weren't allowed to be left-handed, just the same as there are a lot of people who weren't allowed to fit in that criteria, before we actually had a good understanding of what those, what that neurotype actually looked like. So, I think we have to be really careful, in being aware of all of those nuances that are involved, also in being aware of, when we're looking at research, like, what does this help? Like, who is this benefiting, and how is it benefiting, and really not ignoring the things that go alongside these neurotypes, So another one that's commonly talked about is the increase in screens has caused all of these autistic and ADHDers. I'm like, well, no, we just live in a really overwhelming world, and screens are a really good way to regulate. So the people that are using them more are probably autistic ADHDers because they're really overwhelmed.
Yes, yeah.
And so, we're missing so many of these, factors that are key to understanding these relationships, that aren't actually relationships at all. They just, well, that's a bit of data. Cool.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah. And because when was it that autism was first noticed, whatever? I don't know. Wasn't it only the 80s?
I think so. I think so, the 80s. Yeah. And then, so with autism and ADHD, so until 2013, you could not be diagnosed as autistic and ADHD. You only were allowed to be diagnosed as one or the other, because who knows why?
The model,
who knows?
Right.
And then, so we also have, a whole bunch of autistic people who are also ADHD that don't know. and
Yeah,
ADHD is also autistic that don't know.
yeah.
And so, so many of these things, because of our really narrow way of viewing them, we've really let a lot of people down.
Mm, mm.
And so, I really think that as a profession and as society in general, we need to do better. We need to really start unpacking so many of these things and so many of these shoulds, and this is the way we should exist,
Mm.
to make things better for the people that we've let down.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why, like, I wanted you on actually, because there's so much judgment from the outside, like taking my grandkids out, and we'll sit there and they'll be on their phones. We'll be talking while they're on their phones.
Mhm,
Like, Genshin is a big thing. And who's your, they'll talk about that, and then they'll look around and see that something's caught their eye, and then they're back down at their phone. And
mhm,
conversation stops, talking, to the outside world sort of thing. But with their phones, they have the conversation,
mhm.
they have the space, the mental space to be able to converse with me, and in a
Mm,
really great way.
mhm.
So, yeah, I just want that judgment stopped, because we get so many
Yep,
comments from around us.
yep,
And it's
yep,
just, it's hurtful, for one thing, for those kids to hear what those
yep,
people are saying.
yep.
Mm.
And it's essentially, would we be saying to someone who was using an assistive aid, why are you using that? Gosh, why do you need that to be in the world?
Yeah.
You know, I would say we're still pretty terrible in relation to accommodating those sort of needs as well. But I
Mm.
think, the more society can unpack and understand neuronormative expectations and understand, where all of these things are founded, and then the intersectionalities that are involved in that it's not just neurotype, we're looking at race, we're looking at, culture and religion and all sorts of different intersectionalities. The more, we can really start to move away from this is how you're supposed to be in the world. And the more we can kind of embrace, well, everyone's going to be in the world in their own way. And that's great. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So let's waste less time on all of this, adherence to this neuronormative expectations, and more in terms of how can we make this a more inclusive world.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That sounds like that would be your message to people. I was going to ask you, what's your message to people? And I would say that that was it.
Definitely. I think, the more we can understand about each other, and the more we can create space for, that cultural humility just in general, in terms of, I don't know your life. I haven't lived your life. Please
Mm.
educate me on your life. Please
Yeah.
let's all share our unique experiences, and let's make, spaces inclusive for everyone to exist in the way that they want to exist.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. But, of course, we're giving in to those people. They're not fitting into our life. So why should we give in to them?
Mm.
With the general thing. But yeah. Well,
And I think, I guess I say to those people, well, it's a pretty privileged position to be able to talk from, because that would assume that you're the person that fits that,
yeah.
and if you're the person that fits that, then you're the one with the privilege to be able to actually make changes,
Yeah.
and if you're not the person that fits that, because a lot of people who say that also aren't the people that fit that, has it been good for things to be hard for you? And if it hasn't, would we not want things to be easier moving forward for, our future generations?
Yeah.
Just because we've gone through hard things doesn't mean we should wish hard things on other people.
Yeah. 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 There's that old saying of what hurts you makes you stronger. So
Mm.
so,
Doesn't.
no, it can break
It's a
you
lie. It's a
really
lie.
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Chelsea, thanks so much for talking to me, because it's been so interesting, and so much knowledge that you have, that I'm really um it's I really appreciate what you're doing as well. So yeah, I hope all that research gets done very, very soon.
We're making ways. We're making ways.
Yeah.
There's some really amazing autistic researchers that are out there that are doing the good work.
Right. Yeah. I look forward to seeing all that research as well.
Yeah.
So how can people contact you or see what you've done? Yeah.
So I have a website, which is now updated, which actually has stuff on there that's current, which is good. Connect Us Psychology. I have got I was like, what's my book? I have got a book.
Mm.
I'm gonna find it.
Oh, yes.
I can't find it. Where is it?
Oh,
Who knows? I can go grab it from reception. One
yeah,
second.
do that.
We'll just cut to
Yeah.
the grand reveal.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yay. There we go.
Yay!
Yeah.
So I have got a book that I wrote
Yeah.
very impulsively, called Square Me Round World.
Yeah.
And it's
Awesome.
a collection of short stories, fictional short stories about living in a world not built for you. So that's on my website as well, along with all of the other things I decided to create, because apparently releasing a book is not enough. I also run training and things like that. There's some training available just that's pre-recorded on my website. Otherwise, any events and things like that will be up there as well.
Fabulous. And you're on Instagram?
Facebook and Instagram. Oh, I'm not
Yeah.
very. I have lots on socials. I'm not good at socials, but
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
Facebook and Instagram. Connect Us Psychology. Everything is Connect Us Psychology. Keep it easy for my brain.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm still learning how to social media.
Oh,
I
no.
do the best I can.
Excellent. No, and it's really good because I think that's where I got you from, actually, Instagram. So,
Yes,
yeah.
a good place to hang out.
Yeah.
Still learning how to do it.
Well, aren't we all? Thanks so much, Chelsea.
No, you're very welcome. It was lovely to have a chat.